Well, thank you for your careful listening, your engagement. This is the final one, and again, looking forward to the conversation. These are all huge topics. We just touched on the doctrine of God beneath them, but this is another angle that I find very interesting. The God who loves himself but is not a narcissist. So, brief recap. We started with some cosmology, twoism versus oneism, and how everything hangs on the biblical twoism, the creator and the creation. In our last lecture talk, we looked at God's nature and character, the one who is true to himself, and how that challenges the secular aseity project and undermines it in a good way. If it's undermined and we turn to Christ, so that's a victory. So in this talk, the God who loves himself but is not a narcissist, in brackets. So like the last lecture, I want to start by us thinking a bit about what I'm calling the secular self-love project, or a culture of narcissists. I've always thought you can develop your own cultural commentary by looking at t-shirts. You have some text in your t-shirts, but I'm not sure it tells me something about you. But a lot of people advertise in their t-shirts some really core cultural values. So you can be a cultural observer of trends and values in all sorts of ways. Look at t-shirts, they tell you a lot. So not too long ago, walking through Cambridge, a girl who's quite young, I thought she was maybe 12, had a t-shirt with two words on it, love self. It wasn't subtle, but there it was, love self. And I think our secular age has generated a self-love project. I'd say it was slow burning for quite a long time, but now it's an inferno, the self-love inferno. I think I'm going to say this now as a little disclaimer. There is a place for self-love. There is a place for self-love. And later we'll unpack that a little bit. But today it's totally disproportionate. In Augustine's words, it's inordinate. It's excessive beyond all the boundaries that God intended. And for that reason, I think it's deadly, utterly deadly to the human condition. And that's why a number of social commentators and thinkers and philosophers have characterized our age as a culture of narcissism. You remember Narcissist, the Greek god who fell in love with an image of himself in the pool and was so absorbed and obsessed by what he saw, he lost his appetite, he didn't sleep, and he eventually died. So it's a really bad ending. Narcissism is not good for you. That's what this myth teaches us. Now, the secular self-love project, as I see it, has two basic commitments. The first is striving to perfect ourselves, which I'll talk about for a moment. And the other is to make the self central so everything finds its destiny in me, what we call self-referentialism. So the first part of self-love is I need to perfect myself. Now, I think we see this all over the place. One of the places you can see it is in what I call the new religion of wellness. I notice it's been an advert in airports for a long time. David Gantry is it, and he advertises the wellness vitamin. It's why he's a vibrant picture of health and vitality. I'm all for healthy living, but I would say today health has become our new God in terms of how to perfect ourselves. So this cultural movement that generally goes under the heading of wellness is about the wellness of the body and the wellness of the mind, our mental wellness. And in terms of the things it advocates, there's nothing wrong with it. Most of it in and of itself. Some of it is a bit quirky and quacky, but it's talking about important things. It's the underlying philosophy which I'm interested in terms of wellness. Because I think the goal of wellness really is to perfect ourselves. It's another way of optimizing who we are. And what drives it is an undisguised love of self. And what intrigues me is that love of self 30 years ago would have been seen as a vice. Today it's looked at as a virtue. It's good to love yourself. Whereas if someone said, I really love myself a couple of decades ago, someone would say, oh, that's awful. The shift has happened so quickly. Wellness, for those of you who want to see where it is, it's everywhere. It takes lots of forms. You see it in lots of new keep fit regimes. In America, you've got Soul Cycle. I'm not against these things in and of themselves. And in Europe, we have Peloton. You pay a very handsome fee. You get a very, very fancy exercise bike. And you get a personal trainer who can help you optimize your fitness levels as you pedal your way to physical perfection. You see it in new dietary regimes. Don't get me started. It's a similar kind of model, a personal guru, even a seer who knows you and who can find the perfect diet to make you live forever. I call it salvation by food rather than salvation by faith. Lots of other examples. There's skin care routines, 30 minutes every day to basically make you ageless, from age to age the same. Much of wellness focused to the mind. Huge interest today, for good reason, to our mental health. So we have lots of meditation exercises. I just started looking at meditation apps, and I got caught up in Headspace, and boy, it really did my headspace in. It's one of the leaders in it. Find out what getting Headspace can do for you. Start your free trial now. 66 million members. That's the same population of the UK. Build healthy habits. Use anywhere, anytime. Wellness is huge business. It's big business. If I wanted to become incredibly wealthy, I think I'd go into wellness. It's a 4.2 trillion market in G7 countries alone. And that's up from 3.7 trillion in 2015. It's just rocketing, is the wellness movement. So we fork out half as much on wellness products as we do on medical health care. That's a staggering stat. Now, when you look underneath wellness, and I don't think it's even underlooked in a lot of it, when you look at the marketing, it tends to be promoted as self-care. That's a big thing today, self-care. But if you look more closely at it, this is a euphemism for self-love. Because the bottom line of wellness is that your primary obligation, your primary one, is to yourself. And it includes all the requirements for optimizing yourself, for reaching some kind of perfection in terms of your mental state, your physical state. Some of the feedback and the, what do you call it, when someone gives a recommendation was incredible for Headspace. Someone wrote, "I meditate to crush it." Wow. Another said, "I meditate to have the edge." Optimization. Perfect myself. And users of wellness are really encouraged, focus on yourself, your thoughts, your needs, your desires. And what you see in the wellness movement is nothing about your neighbor. It's about you. So the baseline is that you have a primary obligation to yourself to create a better version of who you are. Put your needs, your aspirations first. Peloton did a great Christmas commercial this last Christmas. It features Scrooge, from the Dickens novel, Charles Dickens, the guy who hated Christmas and everything good. Scrooge is the archetype of the selfish man. And some kids knock at Scrooge's door, and he's on his Peloton. He comes to the door, growls at them, and frightens them away. And he gets back on his Peloton with his personal instructor there, and he's meeting his targets, and he's so happy, he's so fulfilled. I love that because it was undisguised. Just follow your own path. Tara Burton sums it up well. And she sees it a religion. Marketing personal self-improvement and commodified self-care as quasi-religious experience has gone viral. The sense of meaning and purpose that contemporary wellness culture provides can be found in health and self-improvement discourse all over the United States and Europe. At its core, wellness isn't simply a marketing scheme or even a self-help mantra. It's a cohesive philosophy of life. It's an inherently meaningful world where you can still ethically do whatever you want. Wellness begins and ends with the self. I think it sums it up really well. And it's interesting, within wellness, you sometimes hear this rhetoric. How other people fit into your project is whether they give you positive energy or negative energy. And I hear people use this language, even Christian, that person is toxic. Human being toxic. They're actually interfering with my positive energy on the way to perfecting myself. So people who don't serve your needs or optimize your experience are toxic. The second feature is the self-referential one. All things find their destiny in me. So the needs of others become secondary to your own, which is first, and you shouldn't let others get in the way of your needs. So it's so clearly self-love in its focus. And this is so normative now that it's changing the way we think about the categories of morality. Good and evil aren't, I can use a philosophical term, metaphysical, God-given categories. They don't exist anymore. There's what's good for me and what's bad for me. That's basically how we're beginning to approach the universe in terms of moral categories. What's good for me, what's bad for me. So this is a very self-referential way of engaging the real. Everything comes down to me. Everything finds its destiny in me. I'm at the center, and I need to find what serves my path to wholeness, my path to wellness. Now, this is the same syndrome that narcissists experienced. So obsessed with himself that he couldn't see anything beyond. He lost touch with reality beyond his own image. And as I said, in the end, it killed him. But the point of the secular self-love project, it's turned everyone into the object of supreme good. I am the supreme good. Everything must fit my needs as the supreme good. And this is no longer even labeled as selfishness. It's actually your priority. It's a virtue. It's what you have to aim for. So, much more could be said. Let's look at why the secular self-love project is failing. And a few points here again. The first is that our quandary as human persons is much worse than we imagine it to be. And again, we come back to the biblical doctrine of sin, which isn't flattering to us, but it's true to the reality of who and what we are. We are corrupt. And we don't have a basis for self-perfecting. We don't even have a basis for the kind of excessive self-love that we carry around with ourselves today. Just as an aside, it's really interesting that the psychology of narcissism struggles to find the line between self-love and self-loathing. So someone who's a narcissist, they look like they're in self-love, but actually it's driven, many would say, by the hating of themselves. It's a very, very fine line and distinction. So the point is this. When our self-love becomes disproportionate, and we don't have the proper view of sin, we operate in this illusion that we're a reservoir of good to be optimized. And to think like that is to be in the realm of fantasy fiction, according to the Bible. So that's the first problem. Our problem is much worse than we imagine it to be. The second is this. Just turn it around. This is really important to me. We were created as humans to be the beloved. Not that we love ourselves. We were created to be beloved of another. By our parents, by our friends, by our wider families. That's at the essence of what it means to be human. We were created to be the beloved. There's a poem, or a line of a poem that expresses this beautifully. Raymond Carver, American poet. And he asked, "And did you get what you wanted from this life? Even so, and what did you want?" His answer, "To call myself beloved, and to feel myself beloved on the earth." I think that's beautiful. That's what we all want, to be loved by another. And the point is, we don't actually improve through the act of self-love. We become who and what we are by being loved by another. It changes the order. And of course, as Christians, we say being loved by God means there's no need to engage in this self-love project, because we're perfectly loved by a God who himself is perfect. So here we come again to a little bit of doctrine of God. We as believers have been brought into the knowledge of God, who is the supreme good. We are not the supreme good. God is. And this is central to the doctrine of God. God is the highest and most excellent being there is. and the early fathers, Augustine in particular, got at this by calling God the summum bonum, the supreme good. He borrowed this from Cicero. So God, in the essence of who he is supreme, the summum, in every respect. There's nothing about God that doesn't reflect the supreme good. So theologians said he's the supreme being, esse. He's the supreme truth, virum. And he's also, something we neglect as theologians today, the supreme beauty. There's an aesthetic dimension to God being the supreme good. And I like this beauty thing because I think the hope of believers through the ages has been what we call the beatific vision. That's our hope. I don't know about you, I'm a little tired of living by faith. We're following someone, serving someone with our whole lives, and we've never seen him. I don't find that very satisfactory. I know I'm called to live by faith, to persevere by faith, but the whole hope is one day faith will turn to sight. We will look upon the supreme good. We will meet him face to face. That's the great hope of a believer. Now, this idea of God as a supreme good is reflected in what theologians have called his divine perfections. The divine perfections. This is a way of saying that every attribute or every virtue in God is present to completeness. It couldn't be more or less. We work to improve ourselves. That's part of the growth in character. I'd like to become a more patient husband, more patient father, to increase in this virtue. God doesn't ever have to struggle to improve some aspect of who he is. He doesn't set personal goals and objectives to better himself. He is what he is to perfection. And what the divine perfections mean for God is that he exists in what you might call a self-enjoyment. This has been very important to the doctrine of God in the past. God has the true basis for self-love, for being at rest in who he is, delighting in himself. He's so perfect in everything that he is that he delights in his own perfections. And this isn't forced, it's not constrained. A lot of the wellness movement is kind of the positivity thing. You see it in our favorite family film, What About Bob? Bob says, I feel good, I feel great, I feel wonderful. Working at self, I feel good, I feel great, I feel wonderful, even though he didn't. God doesn't have to do that. He is great, he is good, he is wonderful. And given the reality of who he is, God can only love himself. Now, many think this makes God totally unattractive. People like Oprah Winfrey and Stephen Fry have called out God on his narcissism. They've actually seen a little theological truth. God's a narcissist, they say. But when you think about it carefully, there's a logic and reason to God's own delight in himself. If he really is the supreme good, there's nothing higher for God to delight in. Makes perfect sense that he delights in himself, because there's no good that surpasses who he is. Now, that just isn't true for a human person. This is where twoism is important again. It's not true for a human person. If anyone in this universe asserted that they were as great and perfect as they could possibly be, hopefully you pick up the phone, call for the men in the white coats to take them away. This person needs some help. They need some therapy. Because anyone who said, I'm as good as I can possibly be, are deluded. God can do that because that's true to who he is. And God's delight in his perfection is why he's totally at rest within himself. He's completely satisfied in his own being. I'm not with my being, who I am, but God is. And I feel drawn to him because he is satisfied in his own being, completely happy with who he is. So when it comes to what we call his moral attributes or the divine virtues, he rests in the perfection of his kindness. He couldn't be more kind. It's a perfect kindness. His love, it's a perfect love. His grace. These exist in God in a measure of completeness and perfection, so they're a delight to him. And that, again, is not something true for us as humans. Now, because of the divine perfections, God intended for him to be the object of our desire. See him for who he is, and we long for him. Delight in him. We were made for that. To share in the joy he has for himself. He invites us to that. So God alone, here's the point, has a true basis for self-love, because he alone exists as the supreme good, utterly perfect, utterly complete, fully at rest in himself. And that's actually good news for a culture of self-love. God is so secure in his divine perfections that he can love us perfectly. We are the beloved because of his divine perfections. It's the basis of his love towards others. And that, of course, means God is not a narcissist. This notion is totally disarmed when you see the quality of love he has for his creatures. We are his beloved. And this love includes his self-giving for us, which is what the gospel is all about. So knowing this God who delights in himself is the basis for humans to find their destiny in God. The idea that everything finds its destiny in me is such a heavy burden. Whoa! But God is at rest in himself. We, all of us, can find and must find our destiny in him. Another way to put this is our delight in God provides the solid foundation for the right ordering of our loves. This is huge for Augustine. How do we order our loves? Well, Jesus told us how to do this in the Great Commandment. Matthew 22, verse 35. An expert in the law tested Jesus with this question, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind." That's the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. It's connected. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets, all of the Old Testament, hang on those two commandments. This is about the ordering of our love. So here's a summary of how our loves are to be rightly ordered. There's two orders to love. And they're different. Connected, but they're different. Our first order of love is for God, the first and greatest commandment. It's a way of asserting we find our destiny in him by directing our delight, our love to him. And it's a total outpouring of who we are. And it's predicated on who he actually is in his divine perfection. So that's why love for God in his divine perfections must be nothing less, this law says, as a total outpouring of the whole of our lives, all our heart, all our soul, all of our minds. And you notice there's no condition attached to our first love for God. It's totally poured out to him as the supreme good, because there's no one higher, greater to love. So why would you love anything else in terms of your primary affection? And this love for God, theologians have been so strong, John Piper does this so well, it includes the love of delight. It's not a coerced love. It's the love of delighting in who he is. And actually, because God's the supreme good, and because we only find our destiny in him, our desires have to be directed if we're ever going to find some kind of, what Lewis called, some consolation for our longings. He said we live now with the inconsolable longing. We know he's the supreme good if we've been drawn to him through Christ and the Holy Spirit, and we have tastes of it. And every taste just builds this inconsolable longing. We want more because that's what we are created for. And actually, Lewis went on to say about this inconsolable longing, I love this. If we find ourselves with a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world. And this world, as Lewis frames it, is delighting in God and all of his perfection. So that's the first order of love. Secondly, for the ordering of our loves, Jesus says, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now again, there's a different order in terms of how this functions. The love of God has no conditional clause. Whereas this one does have the clause, love your neighbor with the clause, as you love yourself. So where the divine perfections means there's no limit to our love and delight in God, it requires nothing less than 100%, our love for our neighbor, for other humans, does have a limit. So we have to use the same measure of love we'd have for another as we'd have for ourselves. And that's appropriate self-care. There are moments when you're so exhausted, you're so depleted, that actually you need to self-care in order to love your neighbor well. You never do that with God. I'm just going to have a break from loving you, Lord, because I need to replenish. We do need to do that at times with our neighbors, our family. We need time for ourselves because we are limited. And that is, in a sense, how our love is ordered there. So there's a proportionality to the love of others. When our love for God is ordered rightly, when God is first in our love, then we're well placed to love other people in the same way as we love ourselves. And that means keeping ourselves in good health, physically and mentally, using the same measure of love that we're meant to offer our neighbor. So, my point, the modern self-love project can't work because we're not the supreme good, only God is. And loving him first above all else frees us then to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. It all gets ordered. So, how not to be a narcissist? Well, it's really quite simple. It's quite complex too, isn't it? But at the end of the day, we have to understand and know the God who made us. And I think we need a recovery in the church of the doctrine of God. God in all of his grandeur, all of his glory. That can recover us as narcissists, because we're here as a self-help group of narcissists, wanting a bit of help along the way, but we're not going to post selfies of ourselves in order to help us here. We just need to see more of who God is.